cross between cultural and political and technological and global events. We're going to be dealing with, at least in part, technology and how industrialization is going to impact, in the late 1800s, is going to impact social development. We're going to talk about the political ramifications of that, social ramifications of this. We're going to be doing little tours of different places. We're going to be talking about Africa, we're going to be talking about Germany, we're going to be talking about Russia. We're going to talk about the women's rights movement of the late 19th and early 20th century with political developments in Britain. So this number 9 here is going to have some interesting components as we go through this. All right. One of the structural changes in terms of industrialization is going to take place when steel begins to seriously replace iron in Western industry. Steel is an overall better substance to use than iron. It's lighter, it's stronger, it's more durable, and you would ask yourself, why would you use iron anyway? Well, iron for a long time had been cheaper to produce. Lightweight steel had been too expensive, and so it doesn't matter how great it is if you can't afford to use it. And so the production of affordable steel is going to make a whole bunch of things possible that hadn't been possible before. Machines are going to be faster and much more long-lasting. Buildings are going to be taller. The skyscraper is going to become a possibility. Bridges are going to be much longer. A great example in the United States is the Brooklyn Bridge, spanning these huge rivers. Only are going to be possible with steel reinforcements. And so this is going to radically change everything, right? These industrial inventions during this period are going to reshape society and how it begins to relate to each other. Telephones are going to make instant voice communication possible, the introduction of the radio in the early 20th century, massive centralized broadcast, the light bulb and the electric grid that is going to come with it, automobiles, the streetcar, airplanes, all these are going to revolutionize technology during this period of 1871 to 1914. All right? Electricity, initially, for light and for a few other things, are going to expand into a lot of other fields with electric railroads, electric factory machinery, electric cranes, on down the list. We will see that petroleum refinement is going to continue to allow for new power sources, reliance on fossil fuels for eventually the automobile, for navies, for airplanes. All of this is going to make these changes in transportation possible as well. Now, overall, what you're going to see is during this period, Germany is going to come to dominate the European industrial scene. However, U.S. industry is going to come to dominate the global scene of industrialization. So here you can see one of these late 19th century steel production facilities using the Bessemer process and the open hearth system and a bunch of other technological changes that are going to make steel affordable, because you'll notice that this requires a lot less manpower. In terms of this. And I love this. This is a bridge scene. This is from Berlin, where you've got this steel reinforced bridge, and you've got mixed in with the new Berlin with the row houses and things like that, is you also have then the farmer's cart, where he's pulling in stuff with a horse. And so then you've got the sort of two Berlins, the old and the new, kind of superimposed on each other. This is Chicago. This is one of these elevated trains that runs above the streets to move people throughout the city, and this is a representation of the global dominance of the United States. The invention of the telephone, of course, is going to radically alter communications forever. This is Marconi with the invention of the radio, allowing for centralized broadcast where you can reach essentially a national audience with radio broadcast. There's Thomas Edison, who gets probably credit for a lot more than he actually invented, but he was a great scientific guy. He also was a great sort of legal guy, made sure that he got patents for everything that he invented, and probably a few that he didn't. But the Edison company is going to revolutionize a lot of different industries in terms of light bulbs, in terms of electricity, in terms of the phonograph with sound recording, with motion pictures, with the introduction of the cinema into society. This is Gottlieb Daimler, and he's riding around in his horseless carriage. Here you can see why they called it that. Just basically take an old horse carriage, remove the horse from the front, stick a motor up underneath it, and you can see here in his young age are doing initially what cars are still the number one thing that cars are still used for today, and that's they're cruising around town and looking to pick up women. So there we have this. I know it's hard to believe that at one point people relegated the automobile as a toy for the rich, and it was never going to be a super important part of society. But a lot of people thought that the Zeppelin, right, the blimp, right, the dirigible, this was going to be the future of transportation. Because you filled up this great big bag with helium, and you could transport large numbers of people and huge amounts of goods over long, transoceanic distances. Because all you had to do is just float along. A lot of people thought that the Zeppelins were going to be the way to go for the future, and that the car was this, nobody's going to use those. It's just rich people are going to have those to cruise around town and pick up girls. But now eventually we'll see that nobody rides around in Zeppelins today except for people taking shots at sporting events, and everybody is completely reliant on the automobile. This is Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. This is the Wright brothers making their first powered flight. Well, of course, you can see that eventually airplane technology would improve some after 1903. This was more of a proof of concept thing than an actual, okay, let's go fly across America. They only stayed a few feet off the ground, and of course the first flight lasted shorter than what is now the wingspan of a modern airliner. So. One of the other changes, of course, that industry is going to wreak is a political one, and industry is going to continue to expand, and that means that the woes of industrial workers are going to become more and more pronounced because more people are going to be wrapped up into this labor system. Right? So, as a response directly to this, socialist political parties began forming in more places where they had not existed before. Now, these parties formed around Europe. But the most important of these was the Sozialistische Demokratische Partei Deutschland, right? The SPD, the Socialist Party of Germany. Right? Now, the SPD espoused the radical revolutionary socialist ideas of Marx. However, international socialism never really takes shape. For those of you that can remember when we were talking about Marx, one of Marx's major tenets was that it has to be an international system. All the workers around the world, they have to get together. But this really is not going to be able to happen because of the strong, fierce nationalist sensibilities that these people had. Yeah, I'm a worker and all that, but I'm German, or I'm British, or I'm French, or whatever. These strong, powerful, potent nationalism is going to prevent any kind of international organizations. You're also going to see that by the time you get to the late 1800s, socialist provisionism had also divided the movement intellectually. Right? Socialist provisionism sought for socialism to seek evolutionary change through democracy rather than revolutionary change through getting people in the streets and starting stabbing them and clunking them over the head with heavy objects. Right? So they argue that actually capitalism is going to make life better for all. There just has to be better representation in a democratic system for socialist viewpoints, protection of workers, and things like that. So this would be some of the early sort of nascent, one of the viewpoints of socialism, of democratic socialism that you can find in large parts of Europe, especially places like Scandinavia today. So as some of these socialist parties become less radical, many of the radicalized elements really are kind of looking for an avenue for how to express their views towards radical socialism. And so one of the major forms of that expression is going to be the anarchist movement. Right? Now these people are going to attempt to tear down all of society and to replace it with a much more socialized regime through bringing down the governments, through essentially what you and I might refer to as terrorist activities. Especially they liked assassination. They also blew up some stuff and burned things down. But their assassination program is actually pretty successful because throughout this period they're going to kill a Russian czar, a French president, an Italian king, and a U.S. President as a result of that. So here's a couple of political statements here, the political cartoons by the SPD. This is the German Socialist Party, right? And you can see again, one of the motifs is red, the blood of the worker, right? Here you can see the fist of the worker, right? He's coming down on the State House, right? They're going to break up the Reichstag with the power of the worker. And you can see that the German worker is extolled as this virtuous, sort of manly fellow, and he is going to have this power. He's got the factory in the background, but he's got the blood of the worker on him as well. This is Michael Bakunin. He's one of the most famous of these socialist anarchists of the late 19th, early 20th century kind of guy. He looks pretty rough. He's been living in the woods. A lot of these anarchists, this is where they would stay, is they have to move out into these remote kind of areas and launch their raids against society from secluded locations. Right? One of the other problems that Europe is going to be dealing with is a massive surplus of population in the late 19th century. This is all due to the fact you've got rising standards of living, greater food production networks, and then also an improvement in medical care. What that means is you've got rising birth rates, people that are living long enough to give birth to the next generation, and then also falling death rates, where fewer people are dying. And so what are we going to do with all this? You've also got this increased mechanization in Europe, which means you need fewer people to do a lot of this type of labor, whether it's on the farm or in the cities. And so you've got a question of, well, what are these people going to do? Europe's population from 1850 through 1910 is going to go from 270 million to 460 million. This is an insane increase in population over a very short period of time. Now, most of the surplus population is going to move from the countryside to the industrial cities, but even the industrial cities couldn't absorb such a huge population shift. Most of the surplus is going to move to North America. Not all of it to the United States, but the bulk of that is going to move to the United States. You can still find, for example, enclaves of German descendants in places like Mexico and some other places. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about the United States as the destination for a lot of these people as they're emigrating from Europe. Over 60 million Europeans are going to leave Europe between 1846 and 1932. So it's going to be a big, big shift over a nearly 100-year period, right? Now, Europeans are going to leave, one, for economic opportunities. You don't have good job prospects for what's going on around you. Okay, so it's a good place to, a good idea to go someplace where there will be good economic prospects. The United States is still a growing nation, both physically and in terms of the number of people that they need for their industries. But many are also going to flee various forms of persecution within Europe. Now, a lot of national minorities, whether you're an overall minority or just a small enclave inside of another nation state, these people feel like they are predated against due to nationalistic oppression. And so they're going to want to leave so that they're not being oppressed. You're also going to see Jews, for example, in Eastern Europe, that they are fleeing oppression from the Tsarist regime and some other groups because of their ethno-religious identification. So they're going to flee to North America in very large numbers as well. Now, many people are also going to flee from Central and Eastern Europe because of the failure of democracy and or socialism. They're going to try to get these political ideas that they've got enacted by their government, and when that fails, they're going to get really, really frustrated, and some of them are going to wind up, in jail. And so many of these guys are going to be looking at, well, I can continue to agitate for political change here, or I can just go someplace where it's, for the most part, free enough to I can vote in my own people and we can effect change that way. So the United States looks particularly attractive to a lot of people for those reasons as well. So this is the ocean crossing that a lot of people are going to have to endure. These are the thick quays in Europe as people are clamoring to get aboard these ocean vessels to get across. And then, of course, the ocean quays are just as thick on the other side as people are getting off in very large numbers. This is Boston. In the 1890, 1895, something like that, the just multinational view as all these people are sort of disgorging from these vessels, and they're making their way into the United States from these various nationalities in Europe. Here's our Irish immigrant in mid to late 19th century. He's going to try his luck in North America with this. One of the other changes that's going to take place due to industrialization is a sense of society is going to shift, okay? And we're going to see this advent of what you and I would refer to kind of today as a mass society, where everybody's just kind of jumbled up together. The numbers are really too large to know everybody in town, okay? And this is going to be divided into three classes. And this is not necessarily the same kind of class that Marx would use, although they'd be pretty identifiable to Marx, even though Marx is writing half a century before this, right? So these three classes, you've got the elite. They're definitely the smallest in terms of overall numbers, but they control the vast amounts of wealth and capital. These are the guys that are going to own the capital businesses by this point, and had become the new aristocracy in terms of politics and society. And many of these people are, in fact, what the French term would be nouveau riche, which is recently acquired large amounts of wealth, but in many cases, really, really large amounts of money as a result of that. And so these are the guys that are going to be sitting on top of the pyramid, and because of this wealth and power in society, they're going to be able to exercise that authority. Now, the middle is going to be a growing group, right? Growing industry is also going to increase the demand for white-collar jobs, not just the people who own the factory, but also the people who are going to be managing it and are going to be performing these white-collar jobs, and particularly those that have an education for it. Now, this is going to allow more people, right, to live this quasi-wealthy lifestyle. Not super wealthy, not with a huge mansion, but with a pretty good house, maybe a couple of servants, The middle class sees education, all right, as access to further success. They're going to stress this for their children. They're also going to stress hard work and especially religion as cultural touchstones, right? Now, the lower class, right, 80% or so of society, and if we're going to break this down by the numbers, they're mostly the working poor that are going to include the agricultural workers, the industrial workers, the domestic servants that you would find in a lot of these cities. Now, rising standards of living and urban reform make some improvements in their lives as well, but the social mobility that is available to these guys hasn't quite percolated down to these guys. And so what you're going to see as important cultural markers is, as I mentioned, education is stressed for those in the middle, responsibility is stressed for those at the top, and discipline is often stressed for those at the bottom. So, and it probably won't take you too long to figure out that this is the elite, right? These guys that are hanging around in the pillared marble hallways with tuxedos at, I don't know, maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, right? Whereas you've got our middle class group. Now this is, of course, a little bit of a humorous jab at the middle class, but this is a middle class family, sort of, kind of, almost wealthy looking. They got nice stuff, but they are educating their daughters apparently pretty badly at self-improvement. And then you've got the working class group of people that are pretty upset. They're living in the basement, and they're upset at the girl because she's broken something, and so this is going to be pretty bad stuff right here. When we look at how industry and changes, political changes are going to work their way out through various specific locales, we get some interesting shifts by the late 19th century. One of the things that when we look at with Germany is that national unification happens, right? But it doesn't end the story. It's not like, okay, well, we got a Germany instead of 365 Germanys, so that's it. There's nothing else to say. No, national unification is going to bring these countries together under one German leadership, but it doesn't end these troubles. Okay, individual German states, they keep their own leaders and in many cases their own administration. They just become states of a federated kind of German empire. Right? Now, they're brought together in the parliament. The most important house that this debate's going to take place is the Reichstag, okay? And this is elected by all male citizens, so you've got universal manhood suffrage with this, all right? Bismarck is going to get an upgrade. He had been the Chancellor of Prussia, one part. Now he's the Chancellor over all of Germany. Now, despite the fact that his job has kind of changed, his overall outlook on how the government is supposed to function does not change. Bismarck doesn't change, okay? He pursues policies that uphold imperial authority. It had been regal authority. It had been for the king. Now he's for the emperor, who, of course, is the same guy. Okay? Now, Bismarck continually succeeds in making sure that any effort to try to liberalize the government and pull power away from the monarchy is defeated. And he's extremely successful at it. He continually thwarts any of these attempts at democratic advances because of his fear that it's going to reduce the authority of the imperial monarchy. Right? He attacked the Catholic powers, the Center Party in Germany, because the church was too powerful politically, and then he turned around and went after the socialists who want socialist reform. They want more of what they want. Ironically, right, he would then go back to the Catholics and say, hey, you want to help me in suppressing the socialists? So Bismarck was extremely adept at, okay, defeating one enemy and then extending the olive branch and say, okay, now, look, you're not going to get what you want, you've got to stay in your place, but now you can join with this coalition of what we're working on now. So he's going to repress the SPD, in part with the help of the Catholic Party. But then he's going to go on, and after they aren't able to enact their own legislation with their own power, he's going to turn around and say, okay, you can have some of what you want. This is going to help undercut a lot of the really radical tendencies of the SPD membership. Say, okay, we want to get a minimum wage, we want to get health insurance, we want to get Social Security, we want to get all these things that socialists in the late 19th century want. All right, well, we didn't get it. So that if you get nothing, then you got nothing to lose. Right? Revolutions, these kind of things happen. So Bismarck would come back and say, okay, you guys can have sort of half of what you want. You can have part of what you want. Well, it's not really a good idea to have a revolution. Maybe we'll get some more later. And so Bismarck was extremely judicious with how he was going to dole this stuff out to make sure that he kept all these pots from kind of boiling over. Right? Now, one of the most important institutions, if not the most important institution inside of Germany, was the German army. It's hard for us to understand how the German army almost formed a state within the state in Germany in the late 19th and early 20th century. The army itself is dominated by the Prussian officer corps. This authoritarian, from the top down kind of view, especially with a Prussian militaristic ethic, is going to imbue itself in the army. And then, of course, the state, the people around, are going to look to the army as they're the great heroes. They're the ones that make sure that Germany is preserved, okay? And so this nationalism of the day, this hyper-nationalism in many cases, right, is going to afford Germany, the German army, the primacy within society, Okay, military style uniforms become extremely fashionable for a lot of people, and this isn't just say, oh well, they dress up the army, they thought it was cool. No, it really took up a large amount of space in the German psyche. Right now, the army used a very careful selection process for its leadership to maintain the aristocratic atmosphere where the Kaiser reigned supreme. So here you can see German military uniforms of the late 19th century, early 20th century kind of on display with these guys who were chauffeurs and police officers, and in many cases just guys who work at the factory, women on the streets with these military style uniforms in the early 20th century. And so it was an important factor here in their society. Okay. Now, as the new century, as the 1900s approaches and then passes, right? One of the things that you'll see a lot of writers in Europe, North America, South America, and a few other places that are kind of connected together, they talk about this idea, this fin de cycle, right? This idea of end of a cycle, beginning of a new one, right? You've got a lot of hopefulness and anxiety that as they move into this idea of modernity, that this is going to be great. Everything modern is going to be awesome, but we haven't really, I don't know really if this is this is what we should put our hope in or not. So it's hope and anxiety kind of mixed together. What's the new century going to bring, right? It turns out it's going to bring a series of disasters, but they didn't know that in 1900. Now science, when we talk about the psychological impacts, science really had a great appeal by 1900 and then on into the 1900s. It tended to offer very hard, sort of factual rules for life that many of the previous ideas that a lot of people had clung to had seemingly failed to do, right? Physics is going to provide some new insights to Marie Curie, right? She's going to discover radiation, kind of the hard way, right? Proving that atoms and all matter are related to energy. This is going to lead eventually to Albert Einstein's work showing the relationship of matter to energy, gravity to energy, space to time, and almost everything to everything else, which is a pretty big deal. It's also going to lead to the atomic bomb, which is probably not as good, right? We're also going to see here that working with this new persuasion of science, Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche is going to propose that Christianity had really enfeebled the West. Nietzsche was an interesting guy, interesting in the fact that he really had kind of a pathetic life. He was racked by diseases, worked in this sort of semi-poverty for a lot of existence. I think he even paid his father. The guy had some issues, okay? His proposition as a philosopher was that Christianity was bad, right? God is dead is one of the great sort of quotes that Nietzsche had, right? And he even argued not only against this. Now we had seen these kind of arguments before. We talk about the Enlightenment. The human reason is the great. No, he said that even rationality is no good, right? Being rational locks people down because it forces you into the ideas that this is the way the mind thinks, and he says you've got to eventually break free of this. And eventually he says that there will be a race of supermen, right? The Ubermensch, that are going to rise up, they're going to free their minds, they're going to lead a new morality, and they're going to come in, they're going to impose a new order. And it's not going to be hard to see how guys like Adolf Hitler later are going to look at Nietzsche and say, oh yeah, we're the Supermen, the Nazis, the Aryans, these kind of people, we're the Supermen. And so it's okay to wipe out huge parts of the population because they're a problem. We have a new morality. And so this is where this line of thinking is going to go. But you can see why this began to appeal to people is that, well, the old ideas, they don't really seem to work for us. And so we're going to glom onto some new ideas. Another important figure, Sigmund Freud, right, through a series of clinical trials, is eventually going to gain a great deal of popularity for linking people's behaviors, right, that are a product of their unconscious selves, right? He argues that people, they have these repressed feelings and they went through these stages of development, id, ego, superego, okay? And he believes that through analysis, through treatment, people can be cured of mental problems. And that those of you that are studying psychology know, well, Freud's got these issues, and that's true, but what you're going to see is the social impact of Sigmund Freud, the idea that, the mind is the key to behavior, okay, is going to have a great deal of appeal to people. So there's Mary Curie. She's actually, despite her French name, she's actually a Polish woman. She had married a French scientist, Monsieur Curie, right? And so there's radium, right? This is it right there. She worked with it. She really, really liked it. It glows in the dark, right? And so she would set it by her nightstand, apparently go to sleep looking at it every night. All of this unprotected exposure to radiation, of course, it shouldn't surprise us, gave her cancer. Along with a few other people. But this is one of the great nerd meetings of all time. You got Planck and Bohr and Einstein there in the middle, and all these kind of sort of the supermen of the scientific movement. But to a lot of people, even the ones that can't understand the math that Einstein and guys like that used to discover these theories, they did like the idea that, well, there are answers. Science provides hard answers. We like that, right? And so they're going to put an ever-increasing amount of faith in science as a result of that. There's Nietzsche. I don't know what he's thinking, but it's probably something screwed up. And so but this is who he is, and this is the ideas that he put forward. There's Sigmund Freud, right? Apparently, he also had a tough time sort of getting along with other people. He was working out of his Vienna office. He had like an ulcer in his mouth or something like that, and it smelled really bad. And of course, smoking cigars, I don't think would help his bad breath. But there's a couch, right, where he analyzed these people. You always see this on TV shows. I don't think psychologists actually use couches anymore. But this is what was going on with these guys. So it shouldn't surprise us that what we're going to see is, especially when we talk about with Europe, the appeal of these other viewpoints, these other worldviews, right, in terms of science, and then also politically, there was really a kind of two-pronged assault on Christianity by 1900 and in the years that went on, right? Science seemed to contradict a lot of church doctrine and lent itself to a new form of power, with man controlling nature. We're no longer subordinate to God and sending hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that. There's a scientific explanation for all this. Now, the liberal nations, one of the things that they're worked up about is not necessarily the theological aspects or the scientific aspects of this, but the fact that the church, for a long time in Europe, had been a political player, and they want to reduce church power and authority. The autocracies during the 1848 revolutions had used the church to prop up their power. They had been anti-liberal, and so in many cases the church had gone along with these regimes, and so many people who were liberal want to see them reduced in power. Now, the churches themselves reacted with very conservative kind of backlash. They're eventually going to condemn kind of all modernity, including progress, liberalism, capitalism, modernism, revisionism. All of this is going to get lumped together. Eventually there'll be a papal bull issued that is going to basically condemn kind of all of this, and is in a lot of ways really kind of overreaction. It shouldn't surprise us then that if the church is going to go after basically everything that's modern. You'll also see some Protestant sides of this in North America as well. Right? Church attendance is going to begin to drop very remarkably. Right? Christian political power was restrained to countries where Christians formed political parties, and so this is what's going to happen here. There's Pope Pius IX. He's the one that would eventually sort of lash out at kind of everybody that was trying to do something modern. So we're going to have modernism is also going to find an artistic expression as well. As we've mentioned several times, we look at art and how it represents people's feelings at various points, right? So people are going to be seeking these new cultures in the arts, right? Now, literary modernism often focuses on the realism of the moment, where eventually you're also going to see a representation of the scientific ideas of Darwinism. We're also going to see political science. Psychoanalysis was often incorporated into novels, that people have these problems. Well, why? Well, there's a reason why these people are like that. So that's what you'll see with this one. Now, in the visual arts, right, modernists are ever increasingly striving to break the bounds of photorealism. This had been one of the great achievements, especially of the Renaissance, of, hey, we can actually produce stuff that really looks like what it is that we're trying to show. But we're also going to see the Impressionist movement as part of this. This is going to be focusing on the impression that the scene makes on the artist rather than just sort of photorealism. Artists is going to take their craft during this period in a lot of different directions. They're going to break up previously rational rules of art. You'll also see for the first time art for art's sake becomes ever increasingly more common. Artists become stylistically and also financially independent. It used to be that if you were going to be an artist, you went and you got a job. Some fairly wealthy patron paid you to come in, and they were going to pay you for a certain number of pieces of art or whatever it was going to work on. You had to do what they wanted you to do because they were paying the bills. And if you wanted to do what you were going to do, well, who's going to pay for all that marble or paint or canvas or whatever? And so you're going to have to get another job or do something else. And so the idea of the starving sort of independent artist that can, make paintings of nothing but people's, backsides because they think that that's interesting. That's when this is going to begin to really come in large measure. Previously, if you've been an artist, you did what other people kind of told you to do. Now, you may be able to contribute a certain amount of style to it, but the idea that you can just do whatever you want didn't really exist until we get to this period as well. You're also going to see modernism in music. the breaking of many previous rules as well. Some composers are going to attempt to create impressionistic, sort of feelings-based pieces, while others are going to seek more nationalistic styles. You'll see that with Sousa and things like that, right? So here's War and Peace with Leo Tolstoy, right? It's ridiculously long if you are interested in this kind of thing. But there's a lot of psychology in this. And so this is as a modernist kind of piece, what is driving these people, these personalities to do this kind of thing. Here's Impressionism in art. And if you look close enough, for those of you clicking along with the slideshow, you can kind of zoom in on the painting and get an idea. It's like, I don't think they really look quite like that. But our art instructor here also informs me, you can see like globs of paint and things like that. It was about the paint. And so really some shifts. You've got abstract art, which again, if you're following along on the slideshow, good luck with this, but it gives you an idea of kind of where artists were going with this. I don't have the music on the show, but it is on the slideshow if you want to listen to it. This is Debussy, if you want to, or if you just want to Google it, right? This is Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, the idea that Impressionism in music, that certain ideas, certain feelings are going to get brought across just by music. You just listen to this. This is going to be an important component later, especially with scoring films and things like that. You're supposed to, certain scenes are lighthearted, certain scenes are action-driven, certain scenes are very emotional, some are sad, some are happy, that kind of thing. Stravinsky, Sousa, some of these other guys that are great sort of nationalist composers with this. One of the ideological kind of oddities that you'll see in terms of the liberalizing trend of much of Western society is the fact that women were largely left behind, right? For most of the 1800s, men had maintained sole control over really everything in society. You've got property, marital rights, and essentially this is going to make women second-class citizens at best. In many cases, a man, he marries a woman, all the property is his. If he dies, it doesn't necessarily mean the woman can get this. Many women in most of these countries cannot engage in a contract. They don't have contract rights for themselves. They can't initiate a divorce. And some extreme examples, a man could just, take his wife and sort of drop her off the insane asylum so she's crazy, lock her up. And so this made women, incredibly dependent upon men. Now, some reforms have been made by 1900 in the more liberal countries. I don't want you to get the idea that all of these sort of draconian measures exist everywhere, but just to give you an idea of kind of the flavor, this is where women in the 1800s are kind of coming from. All right, women can't vote, and a lot of other difficulties still are in front of them, even by 1900. Employment is still largely restricted. The idea that you're going to go out of your house and get a job, maybe, right? Some fields are completely closed to women due to social norms. I mean, yeah, you can point to the fact that, technically we got a lady doctor here or there, but in reality, no, right? There are some things that you're just not going to find women doing. Statistically, you may say, there's a female attorney here, female business owner there, but no, not really, okay? Upper class women are going to begin attending colleges in more liberal societies. But again, the focus of that often was on homemaking and on home management and stuff like that. They're going to be the upper echelon of society, and so they need to learn how to manage large amounts of resources and staff because they're going to be a wife of some other rich guy. So it's a still somewhat delimited kind of education, but any kind of educational improvement is going to be appreciated. All right. Now, protest movements around Europe and the United States are going to form for women's rights. Now, the most frequent issue that's centered on female suffrage, the fact that these women can't vote. Governments were very slow to act and usually tried to shut down these protests. There's Emmeline Pankhurst. She's our British lady who's going to be leading a lot of these protests for rights for women, especially votes for women. And you'll notice that most of the people in the audience are not women. They're mostly men. This is one of the oddities of the quest to be able to vote is women are going to have to convince men to vote them the vote. So she was not above getting herself arrested. There's Mrs. Pankhurst being hauled off by the constable, I think after harassing the Prime Minister or something like that in London. You can also see a couple other men giving her what for or what they think of a woman like her speaking out in public and things like that. And so significant obstacles for women in society. Now, one of the interesting things people ask me about is, liberal conservative kind of thing. I said, well, the policies in some ways, they've really, the labels have evolved in their policy demands. intervening centuries. By 1900, you are going to see the beginning of this evolution. Right? The Liberal Party, for a long time, had been the party of limited government, and only do this kind of thing. Businesses need to expand, that kind of thing. But the problem with this is they've got to continue to get elected, right? Now, a number of tentative reforms had been backed by the Liberal Party in the latter decades of the 1800s, but they faced ever-increasing pressure from workers' groups coalescing in the new Labor Party. Okay, this is the Socialist Party, essentially. All right. Now, the Labor position was not revolutionary socialism. It's not Marxism. Okay, but it was evolutionary. It was democratic socialism. We're going to vote ourselves, what we want from the government. Okay. Now, to head off this loss of power, the Liberals are going to turn towards the new Prime Minister, Lloyd George. All right. Now, George is going to adopt these greater reforms, such as national worker insurance, and to try to pull away labor's issues. However, the Liberals, who had opposed government intervention, they began providing more and more government services to advance these social causes and to head off labor's advances until eventually what we're going to see is the Liberals and labor, they're pretty indistinguishable in terms of what they're doing. There's Lloyd George, one of the great mustaches really in all of European history, at least in my opinion. I mean, it kind of looks like a caterpillar maybe got snorted out of his nose or something like that. But really, really epic kind of guy. So there he is meeting with these people, right? He's got the little kid who's got the little banner, for Social Security and things like that, workers' benefits. And so there he is meeting with workers, right? He's actually going to go and talk to these people. This is him actually meeting with a disabled worker. Now, while this is a political cartoon, the idea of disability insurance for the disabled, right, is going to go a long way to try to making these inroads, but it's also going to fundamentally transform the Liberals, right? When we go east of there, we're going to see that one of our big dates is going to be 1905, right? 1905, in terms of both sort of Eastern Europe and Asia, is the fact that the Russian czars had long looked towards expansionism as a good way to kind of take pressure off of everything else in their government. A lot of people want more liberal democratic reforms, and say, we don't really want that. You're also going to see the beginning kind of clamorings a little bit of socialism, which eventually, of course, would explode in 1917 in revolution. But a good way to let that pressure off is, we're going to go with nationalism. We're going to go with national expansionism. The problem with this is one of the other nations that's looking to expand in this area is Japan, right? Japan is going to, in the late 1800s, undergo a radical transformation of its own with the restoration of the Emperor Meiji to positions of real authority and power. They are going to look towards industrialization and the addition of expansionism to their plate to change their futures in this world. Japan had been very xenophobic, very sort of inward-looking, and then when the United States kind of forces its way into Yokohama Harbor, they completely changed their viewpoint. They're going to be modern, they're going to be industrialized, and they're going to be expansionist. Well, Japan's expansionism is going to run directly headlong into Russia's expansionism, and they're going to clash over these Asian ports. Vladivostok, Port Arthur, this kind of area of what is the eastern end of Russia. Okay, and what you're going to see is normally you would say, you got Russia and you got Japan. Japan. Come on, right? No. It turns out that while Japan is a lot smaller, they were a lot more modern in terms of both their military technology and their military approaches. And we're going to see that the outdated Russian fleets and armies are going to be soundly defeated by the Japanese on both the water and on land. Well, the Russians are forced to sue for peace and admit, hey, we've been beaten. Okay. This is going to touch off a great deal of unrest. The war itself had produced a great deal of disruption in the Russian economy. War tends to do that, especially in a very authoritarian government where society is already pretty highly regimented anyway. And then you say, okay, we're going to take some of the resources that we've been giving you people and we're going to send it to the military. And then, okay, all right, well, we don't really like that, but we're going to get something out of this. Oh, yeah, we'll conquer this area and we'll get a bunch of stuff. And no, in fact, we spent all these resources and we lost. Okay, so there's going to be a number of people in 1905 that are going to have vested interest in rebelling against the Tsarist regime. Workers are going to protest the poor conditions. The peasants are going to complain about the lack of land access. And of course, as I mentioned, the mobilization for the military had disrupted the food distribution networks as well. The middle class is relatively small here in Russia, but the middle class, they're liberals. And they protest the lack of any kind of democratic representation in the government. we're going to see that the 1905 revolution is going to be pretty nasty. The army is going to fire on the protesters, and this is going to cause things to break out into open rebellion, okay? Now, and it gets so bad, I think that the battleship Potemkin is going to like open fire on people in Sevastopol. It's going to be really, really kind of ugly. The Tsar is going to back down, right? And he's going to allow for some liberal reforms via the Duma, all right? We're going to have an elected house, okay? What we're going to see, though, is just like we saw in 1848 and much of the rest of Europe, 1905 is going to be kind of Russia's moment to, oh, the revolutionaries are all against me. Okay, sure, okay, we'll give you some of you guys what you want, calm down. And then once they calm down, we're going to start picking apart their coalition. You're going to see that in many cases, what the Tsar is going to do is he's going to incorporate the liberals to work against the socialists and repress the workers. Over the course of the next 9 years or so, the Tsars are going to increasingly backslide on their promises to give real power and authority to the Duma, and they're going to curtail these liberal reforms, and they begin again using the army as basically the basis for their power by 1914, by the outbreak of World War I. It's going to be, stomped by the boot, you do what we say, or we shoot you. And so there's going to be a strong sort of bubble in a lot of in the Russian population. A lot of people had wanted to get rid of this kind of regime in the 1905 revolution, but they don't quite get it. And so these are the people, this is when the 1905 revolution was still the 1905 protests, right? Eventually we're going to see that as they get too close to the palace, the Russian guards are going to open fire on them. This is the Marines from battleship Potemkin. This is Sevastopol as these guys are being gunned down on the steps. This is another view of these guys being shot at from the palace here in St. Petersburg. There's a really great film, and you can find it on the internet because it's public domain. Battleship Potemkin. This is one of the earliest films. It's from the 19-teens, like 1916, something, 1911, something like that. Of course, it's a silent film, but it's got one of the great tropes. The baby bouncing down the stairs and stuff like that. Of this fighting taking place as well. As we set the stage for World War I, we also have to mark another important milestone, and that is the ascension of Kaiser Wilhelm II to power here in Germany. Wilhelm II is going to take the throne in 1888 upon the death of his father. Wilhelm is one of the most important guys in really kind of world history. Not so much for being a great person, but really kind of for being an awful guy. He was very tactless, and he was also very unpredictable. Some people think that it was due to the problems of his birth, that he was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, didn't get enough oxygen to his brain for a while, and also one of his arms was mangled, and so he suffered a sort of psychological problems of having a birth defect. Nobody knows for sure, but he was an incredibly erratic guy. He'd talk to you, he'd be kind of normal for a while, but then he would change his positions, sometimes from day to day, and so it was really hard to get a read on, right? And like I said, this may deal directly with with his birth. It may have been due to his upbringing. His mother was Queen Victoria's daughter, and Wilhelm hated his mother. His mother had tried to introduce a more liberal type of government like you see in Britain, all right? But he didn't like that. I think one of the first things that he did, assuming power, like he locked his mother up in whatever city she was in and wouldn't let her out. And so he was an odd guy, and he was very hard to get a read on. Okay, but he definitely wanted to be in charge. He was an autocrat that liked being an autocrat for himself, and he didn't like the fact that a lot of people looked to Bismarck. Bismarck's the great leader, not Wilhelm. And so in 1890, right, 2 years into his Kaisership, he dismisses Bismarck as chancellor, and he wants to rule more directly himself. So he's going to imbue a lot of that power that Bismarck had held at the behest of the king to himself. He and Bismarck never really saw eye to eye anyway, and he also didn't want the competition politically. So, all right, under his rule, under Wilhelm's rule, Germany is going to continue to expand industrially, right, and also militarily, and really is going to become the #1 European power in both of these fields by 1914. However, what you've got is this very modern power that's chained to a very backwards authoritarian state. The Kaiser of Germany, he really looked a lot like a medieval European prince, a European king, European monarch, with his views on kind of how society is supposed to be put together, the rituals and the rites and things that you have to do in order to maintain power. It really kind of looked pretty medieval in terms of his outlook on how the world is put together, and that's the power structure. But then you've also got guys with trains and trucks and machine guns, and eventually we're going to see with submarines and airplanes and things like that. And so you've got this very odd situation with a society that's producing all these industrial goods with some kind of medieval monarch kind of sitting on the throne, right? Well, you do have this bubble upwards for liberalism, right? That Wilhelm is not going to be as adept at quelling, and so he is going to understand the idea that nationalism can often clip the wings of liberalism, and so he's going to steer Germany ever increasingly towards imperialism and try to focus this attention, these national energies, towards expansionism rather than reform. So to that he's going to be pursuing colonies in Africa and in Asia and in some other places, building of a great German navy, and this is of course going to cause a great deal of conflict with Great Britain. So there's Wilhelm, or at least there's how he wants us to remember him, right? This is him in his youth and things like that. And there he is dismissing Bismarck from the ship of state, right? Bismarck has been confined to the dinghy of history. And there he goes, right? So one of our major themes that we're going to be dealing with here is this explosion here in the late 19th century of imperialism really around the world for what you're going to be seeing. You've got European imperialism in Africa and in Asia. You're going to also see Asian imperialism with the Japanese. We're going to see Middle Eastern imperialism to a certain degree by the Ottoman Empire. You're going to see North American imperialism by the United States. Okay, why does this all happen? Why does this happen? You've got really kind of three major factors that all come together. First of these is economic, right? The colonizing nation can utilize the raw materials of a colony and then also use the cheap labor as a way to produce these raw materials in a way that then the home country can manufacture industrially in its capacity. Also, you're going to see that on the back end, it can use this native population of the colony as a captive market, essentially, for its own industrial products. So you crank out the raw material, whether it's pineapple or sugar or rubber or oil or whatever, and we'll take it back, we'll manufacture it into something, and then you can buy this finished product from us. There's also a military consideration, and that is any of these far-flung colonies are going to enable the master country to access bases that it can use to essentially either attack potential military enemies or use as a first line of defense against any attack from them. This is going to strengthen themselves against possible enemies, but we're also going to see that there's a nice little link between the two, right? Increased military presence around the world is going to increase the global market for a greater economic expansion. Greater economic expansion means more cash for a greater military presence around the world. So this creates a great cycle. We're also going to see that one of the major components of expansionism throughout the world at this point is going to be nationalism. The idea that you've got this domination of lesser peoples makes the home country look strong. Even if you go and beat the stuffing out of some, little kid around the street, at least you beat the crap out of them, right? This is going to be the feeling that a lot of these countries are going to have. Now, it's going to be rationalized into what is often referred to, especially by the Europeans and Americans, as the white man's burden. You go to these countries, these guys are living in mud huts and they're barefoot and this is terrible, right? We're going to bring in civilization. We're going to bring in Christianity. We're going to bring in the idea they're going to have jobs and they're going to engage in labor contracts and things like that. We feel bad for these kind of people, but of course, still works to a great advantage to the colonizing power. So we got a few examples of this, right? You get the British Empire by 1914, right? By far the biggest, the most powerful empire in the world. It has the most wealth, it has the most people, and of course it's got the best military bases, the best strategic locations that you can have anywhere. Now the most valuable actually economically is going to be India, but second is going to be these Chinese ports that they're going to have access to as well. Now you contrast this to, for example, the German Empire, okay? Germany is growing in power thanks to its unification in 1871, and then also in industrialization. But Germany really is kind of late to the game as far as colonization goes, because they don't have much of a navy until right before World War I. And by the time they get into the game, all the good beachfront property is taken, right? All the best real estate have been taken by the time that the Germans are ready to engage in colonialization, right? Germans really feel like they should be allowed to have these colonies too, and they feel like they're being kind of pressed out of the European political game by the way that the other countries are kind of keeping them out of the good stuff. And so you can see that this is Germany. This is their holdings here in brown. You get West Africa and you get East Africa. Right? You get some islands out in the Pacific. You get this kind of worthless peninsula on the Chinese mainland. And so they feel like they've been kind of handed the scraps, the leftovers, which is actually pretty true. That's what had happened. And so as a result of that, there's this constant kind of jostling with these other European powers for colonial territories. And of course, that jostling is going to eventually give way to a military confrontation. Right? One of the great examples of this, especially from a European point of view, is this scramble for Africa movement. All right? By 1880 or so, science had really conquered this one barrier to European colonization of sub-Saharan Africa, and that was disease. Throughout much of this period of the 1500s, really onward, European powers of varying kind of levels of consistency had tried to colonize a lot of places around the world. They definitely come to dominate a lot of the places. And the one place that was really conspicuously absent from this list was sub-Saharan Africa. The reason for that was all these diseases. These sub-Saharan African diseases killed white people from Europe like it was their full-time job. Okay? You went in there and you didn't come back out alive. So what happens is, though, with eventually discovering, oh, it's microbes, and if we have these vaccines, and if we do this, then we won't get this, then all of a sudden what that means is all this colonial power that had been kind of building up all around sub-Saharan Africa, the dam is going to finally burst. All right? So as a result, these Europeans are going to engage in this sort of mad rush for land. And they're capturing as much of Africa as possible, really beyond their capacity to understand, in many cases, why they were doing this. Okay, you're just taking these places over. You're working out, military campaigns against the Zulus, or you're dealing with local chieftains in these sort of odd tribal kind of customs to deal with land. In some cases, you're going to see one group of colonists is going to fight different groups of colonial powers. Where you get the Boers, who are Dutch descendants, are going to be fighting the new British people that take over South Africa. You've got a great deal of chaos that's going to take place in Africa. Now, Britain and its powerful navy is going to take the lead. I think even still today, the British monarch is the empress, or if you get a male, the emperor of Africa, right? But we're going to see that France and Belgium is going to be following pretty closely behind this. And so Germany, the latecomer, is going to have to take kind of what is left over. So this is the stage, right? You've got a very tense kind of situation, socially, economically, politically, colonially, on the eve of World War I in 1914. And so it's going to, when you've got a lot of dry tinder on the ground, it shouldn't be too hard to understand why you get a big fire from eventually just one spark.